in the middle of the night, without anyone knowing about it. An entire town simply vanished. And when they looked for it in the morning, they saw something that they never expected to see. What happened in this story is truly unexplainable. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe if you haven't, so that you won't miss any future videos. This is the terrifying story of the river that swallowed an entire town overnight. It all started in 1970, when the people of Atchison noticed something strange happening in the Missouri River. There was a place where the river made a sharp turn, but now the water was flowing straight. The locals said that this must have been caused by a landslide that had occurred further up the river. They went on to explain that this type of thing had happened before, and that the river eventually returned to normal after such events. So everyone went about their day like it was just another Tuesday. However, the next day, they would regret not paying more attention to the previous day's events. When they came outside the next morning, the sun glistened off the water, and they could see that the river was now flowing through an entirely new path. Nobody knew what had caused this to happen. One minute, everything was fine, and the next the river had changed its course completely. It was as if someone had rerouted the river intentionally. But how? Was there some kind of secret tunnel under the riverbed? Were aliens really responsible for this? Or was this a freak natural occurrence? No one knew the answer. It was then that they realized with horror that the river had swallowed an entire town, including over 200 houses and over 100 businesses. All that was left standing were some chimneys protruding from the water like the skeletons of some drowned giant. To make matters worse, most of the people who lived in the town worked at the nearby railroad yard, which also got swallowed by the river. But since it was the weekend, all of them were out enjoying time with their families. Therefore, nobody was at work to sound the alarm or call for help. But how did this even happen? How can an entire town just disappear? Well, believe it or not, this actually happened in real life. And although the town wasn't completely destroyed, it was still pretty close. You see, when the residents first realized what had happened, they contacted the police. But the officers didn't know what to do. Even the governor was confused by this sudden change of events. No one knew how to react. In reality, it took several hours for the authorities to figure out what had happened. They sent out a helicopter to search for answers, and soon realized that the reason behind the disaster was an enormous amount of water that had accumulated in a lake called the conservation pool. This pool was located upstream and acted as a protective measure against flooding. However, on July 1970, the dam that held back the water broke, and the floodwaters rushed downstream. As the water made its way down, it washed away everything in its path. Houses, trees, bridges, cars, animals. Nothing could withstand the force of nature. By the time the floodwaters reached Atchison, the damage was already done. The town had been completely obliterated. As the waters receded, people began to survey the damage. You may be wondering why the conservation pool dam broke in the first place. Well, the truth is that no one knows for sure. Some believe that heavy rains caused the dam to overflow, while others believe that the dam was simply too old and couldn't withstand the pressure. Regardless of how it happened, the fact remained that an entire town had been wiped off the face of the earth. At least 180 million cubic yards of earth were washed away in the flood, leaving behind a path of destruction that was over 2 miles long. The floodwaters also deposited silt and sand along the Missouri River, changing its course forever. But the damage didn't stop there. Many of the homes that were left standing were severely damaged. In total, 1,357 properties were affected by the flood, and when the residents returned home, they found that their belongings had been tossed around like toys. Furniture was smashed, dishes were shattered, and clothes were strewn across the floor. Some residents lost everything they owned in the flood. They had to start over from scratch, picking up the pieces and trying to rebuild their lives. But despite all the destruction, there were no casualties. Everyone had evacuated in time. And when the flood hit, only one person was injured, a man who fell while trying to secure his boat. The town's fire chief later described the scene as one of utter devastation. He said that he had never seen anything like it before or since. "I don't think people realize how close they came," he said. "We were very fortunate that there wasn't anyone in town. If this had happened during the week, there would have been an unbelievable loss of life. Indeed, the timing of the flood was nothing short of miraculous. Had it occurred just a few days earlier or later, there is no telling what the death toll would have been. But as it stood, the town was completely destroyed, and the residents had to find somewhere else to live. In the aftermath of the disaster, many questions were raised about the safety of the dams in the area. The Conservation Pool Dam was just one of many that had been built along the Missouri River to control flooding. But it seemed that the system was not foolproof. In the years since the flood, several other dams have been built in the area to try to prevent another disaster like it from ever happening again. But the damage done to Atchison was not just physical. Many of the residents never returned to the town. They had lost everything and were afraid to start over. Others simply couldn't bear the sight of the ruined homes and businesses. For them, it was too painful to stay in Atchison. But those who did return were determined to rebuild. They came together as a community and began the long process of cleaning up the mess. They salvaged what they could from their homes and businesses, and then they started to rebuild. It was a slow process, but eventually, Atchison began to look like its old self. New homes and businesses were built, and the town carried on. Although Atchison was never the same after the flood of 1970, the residents should consider themselves lucky. It could have been much worse. The damage caused by the flood was extensive, but it could have been far worse if the timing had been different. The fact that everyone was able to evacuate in time and that only one person was injured is nothing short of a miracle. As for the cause of the disaster, we may never know for sure why the Conservation Pool Dam broke, but we do know that natural disasters can strike at any time and without warning. We can learn from the disaster and take steps to protect ourselves against future floods. But ultimately, we are at the mercy of nature. In conclusion, the story of the river that swallowed an entire town overnight is a reminder of the power of nature. It is a testament to the strength of the floodwaters that they were able to wash away an entire town, and to the resilience of the human spirit that the people of Atchison were able to rebuild their lives. Let us hope that such a disaster never strikes again. What do you think caused the river to suddenly change its course? Do you think it was a landslide, an earthquake, or something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you have one so that you won't miss any future videos. Thanks for watching.